Okay, I'm Scott Bowden, work in the specialised commissioning finance team in the London region. Shall I say a bit more about the SpecCom team? Yeah, so while we're part of the London region finance team, we're actually all embedded into the wider specialised commissioning team. At one point, I think there are about 120 or 130 people in the team. So we've also got a reporting line into the specialised commissioning directors, and we work very closely with contract managers, with business intelligence staff, with quality and service leads as well. In finance, we're split geographically across the whole of London, and the other teams are split geographically as well, but they're not always in the same way that we are. And we spend a lot of our time out visiting trusts. So for any different ways of working, we've got a lot of complex connectivities and a lot of other people that we need to fit in with at the same time.
Thanks, Scott. So my name's Tanya Rogers, and I also work in the same team as Scott and Breck, and that is specialised commissioning, but looking after specifically North East London and North Central London.
And I was the head of finance. So just coming back after COVID, where we all worked in sale work, and we all got a bit seconded into different areas, Grace. And but the substantive job is the head of finance for the North Central North East region, where I try to feed our team in to support the wide structure which Scott has just outlined. The contract managers, the business intelligence, the CSU, we have external contractors in supporting with some of the information, and obviously trying to coordinate the touch points with all the trusts. So, and provide the regular financial reporting outputs that the team are required to deliver. That's my role, to coordinate that.
So at the moment I work a 9-day fortnight. So when I was in the specialised commissioning team, I took every other Monday off and then would work from, say, 8 o'clock to 5 o'clock were my sort of fixed hours.
So I do something similar, and for those that haven't come across 9-day fortnights before, what essentially it means is within a normal fortnight you would tend to do 10 working days, and what we do instead is do the same hours but over 9 days, so that every second week you essentially have a non-working day. Mine happens to be on a Friday, so every second Friday is my non-working day.
And so we all, as a team, there were 6 of us in the North Central North East team, and we fully adopted this process. We all worked there was one of us who actually looked at compressed hours, but in general we worked the same sort of 9 working days in a 2-week period, but we coordinated our time. So if one of us was away on a Friday, the other would be able to cover that as well. So I was also working 9 days in 10. 9 till 5 general hours, and depending on demands we'd work round that overall pattern.
So essentially, going back to summer 2019, we were in a larger office, and we were just about to move into an office where we were going to lose between sort of 33 and about 50% of the desks. So something had to change drastically, and so it was sort of set out for the whole team, and I don't mean just finance or just our sort of smaller finance team, but the whole wider team in terms of the whole of SpecCom, that everyone was set the challenge, essentially, that everyone was going to work from home, and that was both working from home but flexing our hours accordingly as well, to be able to fit into, so we just have enough desk space in our new building, which was at the time Wellington House. So one of the things that came about was that we would only be working in the office 3 days a week, then have our flexible working over and above that as well, to accommodate it. What we did initially was we set up a schedule to see what everyone wanted in terms of hours or was suggesting, and how that fitted in with everyone else. So there was sufficient cover across the individual teams, like our smaller finance team, but also within the MDT sort of multidisciplinary teams we work. So I happen to be a finance lead on BARTs, for example, so making sure there was cover on BARTs on any given day as well. And when we first set it up, it was done as an initial trial for 3 months just to see how it all panned out and the impact it might have on those cognitivities that Scott mentioned, because we link in with a national SpecCom team, we link in with numerous trusts and things as well. So it was just to make sure that it all panned out and worked out well. Just fast forwarding a little bit now, because that was 2019. Through COVID, we've all gone on to we've been redeployed into different roles and have still carried on doing the 9-day fortnights, although of course for stages, like a lot of people did, working from home fully at that point in time. And now that we are returning back to the office, actually the office we were in previously is going all together, and because of that there'll be even reduced space in our current office, so we'll only be going back to the office 2 days a week, which, or at least one of those will be fixed so that the whole team is in on the same day.
One of the interesting adjuncts to that work is that just before COVID, we were talking about working more closely with the ICSs, ICBs as of now, where we would use some of the space because we could see the reduction in space coming, look to try and organise with other trusts, some of our partners, organisations for having dab down places, workstations within their organisations, so we could work more closely with them on a day-to-day basis where necessary, but also be more flexible about the working space across London. Now, as we had, I would say, and interesting to hear what Tanya and Scott say about this, because we didn't go, this was introduced really quite tightly within finance and commissioning within London region. The rest of the ICBs and the rest of the London, the actual trusts and the commission organisations weren't quite so ready to set up for that. So there wasn't necessarily the space or the technology at the other end. But this is something we're exploring, and I think we'll need to explore further as we go to full implementation and back to normal working after COVID. Yes, so that's for me to go through. So there was a team schedule. A team schedule was started off at the local level, so we had a team of 6. We looked to set up the non-working days, start off with established non-working days. There was flexible working where we weren't too intransigent about this. If there was a large distance to travel, some of our colleagues had a long way to travel in, so coming into the office was not very easy. So we could adjust and work to 3 days attendance in the office. Others, however, though that was available, we didn't necessarily take that up. I worked quite close to the main office, so I went in 4 to 5 days, well, 4 days a week or 5 days a week, depending on which non-working week it was. So we had to sort of just look to what fitted. So there was a bit of a sort of introductory period where we worked out how exactly we were going to actually work our lives. So we needed about a month or so to get that worked out. Then we did a formal team schedule, which we shared. I mean, the key driver for all this being successful was our 2 senior leaders. We had the director of commissioning, wasn't his role. Our lead commissioner was a guy called Ian Jackson, and our deputy director of finance was a chap called Chris Morton, and they were fully invested into this role. So they oversaw this and looked to ensure that we fully implemented and delivered to this within a set timetable and a real focus. That was a really key part of this. So we put together this schedule over quite a short period of time, Scott, Tanya. I think we managed to get something up and running within about a month or 2 months. But there was a bit of flexibility where we had to find out what worked. There was negotiation with family members. You know, the head had to fit in with overall lives. So it can't. So I think that it needed a bit of time to settle in and to get established. But that was crucial, and being led by our senior leaders. Alongside that, and part of that was getting everything logged properly. So we had to give access to everyone's diaries, or electronic diaries, and so we could see when working days were logged. Had to get much more efficient on managing leave, because to see the long-term process and long-term schedules of where everyone's going to be, we had to start very much more coordinating all our lives together. That took a bit of time, but I think really underpinning that was, it was very basic, but sharing it, making sure everyone shared their Microsoft calendars so that we could see and know what each other were doing. Out of office signatures. In fact, this whole process drove a lot of best practice which should have been in place before, but I think it established this and hardwired it into all of our work. We made sure our out of office signatures were up to date. We made sure that they were telling people who read our email signatures where we were and what we were doing. That took a little bit of time to make sure everyone complied. That's part of the 2 to 3 month process. There were the core days we established. So life turned out that Mondays and Fridays fitted for the non-working day, fitted with everybody's fitted in the best possible way of most people's working lives. So in the end, we decided for the 3 core days to be Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday, which gave us time so that we knew that majority of us would be in the office to deliver training, deliver meetings where we wanted to share space and share face-to-face meetings. And so we always maintained the ability to see each other and have those personal, by the water cooler conversations, those conversations where you need to actually be very close to people's responses, and those were nice. Those were timetabled in Tuesday to Thursday. The flexible needs of the practice. So once we had established locally, we then had to test all our processes with our MDT teams around us. Scott and Tanya have outlined exactly where those interfaces lie. Now that there was a test, there was not everyone, the awkwardness is that not everyone always felt this was a comfortable way of working. So it took a bit of time to make sure, to ensure that everyone understood how this would look, how this would feel, and to start coordinating our time so someone could attend the meetings. We had to cross skill. This is something I think I was quite proud of in North Central, North East. We were well ready for, but one of the things that we were ready for was we knew very much what each other were doing, what each other's outputs were. We were measuring our performance by who were our responsibilities, but also what we did. But we had to get even better at that, to know that if we had to cover, we could cover those meetings to allow this flexible working to actually live, to be real, to actually work properly, so people didn't feel the negative benefits. That didn't work perfectly initially, but we worked on that, and I think that's part of the 1 to 2 month implementation phase. So it did take a little bit of work and leadership to make sure that we knew where annual leave was being taken. Obviously, for our finance departments, end of the year, month end, we did have to look to perhaps work a bit more closely and be more in attendance on Fridays and Mondays and those times, and maybe look to try and have to take one of those owed days at a different time at a slightly less busy working point in the month. Talked about the senior teams, and I think absolutely crucially to this was the technological support to this. When we started into this, we didn't have necessarily, Teams was very, very nascent. It wasn't well understood by everyone. We asked one of our team, who was a technological keen on technology, well versed, to become the champion, a super user, to test the system, and to then train all of us on how to optimize our use of IT. That got a bit broken up by COVID, didn't it, Tanya and Scott? But we were ready when that came, because we had some decent focus training, which we all owned, because one of our colleagues we gave responsibility to get us all up to the right speed. We're all at different points in the technological journey, and she helped us get there. So that's mobile phones, laptops. We had to make sure the conference rooms were all connected up, and these weren't all in place when we went live, Grace. So it was important to use that first month and 2 months to make sure we had all the technology up and running. And I think those are the key elements to make sure that we could all work together, support flexible working, and make sure it was a success.
At director level, we really had a lot of support for flexible working in the specialised commissioning team, and it genuinely worked really well for our team that Brett led. But this was driven really by a lack of office space, and there were some other members of the team culturally, so members of the finance team, who really didn't believe in people working at home and made negative comments and that sort of stuff. So what did happen sometimes was on the Tuesday to Thursday, never a problem on a Monday or Friday, there'd be a lack of desk space. We did have a desk booking system, but some people didn't adhere to it. So I just think there's a danger that the whole facilities and the whole office needs to be brought into this as well, so that when people do come into the office, that there is a desk for them, and they know where they're going to be able to sit. It's quite unsettling otherwise. I think now we're all starting to go back to the office as well. In the London region, again, we've got a lack of space, and you get into escalation where people are getting into the office earlier and earlier, not just to find a desk, and it's So that aspect needs to work alongside the positive bits as well.
And can I just add to that? One of the things we're facing at the moment is going back, and then, you know, it's understandable, but we have a suite of desks, but not all of them have the same level of readiness. So this range of desks available, you often have about 5 or 6 which are down. So I think one of the most important things to make this successful is that we get to a point where we know that all the desk space is actually up and running and fully functional, because there is a risk of booking a desk and finding that desk or that docking opportunity is not available. So it requires the support services to make sure that the facilities are a little bit more reliable, so that there isn't an arms race for getting in and getting the best desk.
And I think also something we didn't touch on earlier was that having standard kits. Everyone has the same type of laptop, everyone has the same chargers, and when you do go in, all the hot desks are set up with the same kit, so that you're not going, oh, I haven't worked with this kind of screen before, and you know, fiddling about with kits. You can literally plug in and go, because you know exactly how it all works, and it fits what you work with at home.
Me, this is the first time I've done it in the NHS. A long time ago at the start, very long time ago at the start of my career in the civil service, flexible working was a thing, and I think people could take something like 2 days off a month if they worked enough. But that was more regarded as for junior staff, and again, it was regarded that people would game the system so they could take days off. But certainly in the NHS, I haven't done flexible working before. I've been in the specialised commissioning team.
I've had a slightly different experience. I've had quite a mixture of different types of flexible working through my career. So I worked in banking, which was very long hours, but because of that, they had the opportunity to take back time as and when you weren't working on big projects or working up to big deadlines. When I worked in local authority, I did a job share. So I literally shared a role with someone else. We each did 3 days a week, so there was an overlap of one day where we could compare notes and make sure there was a decent handover in there for team meetings, and we managed staff as well, so we could link in that way. I also have done a compressed week. So prior to working in specialised commissioning, I did a compressed week. So essentially, I did my hours within 4.5 days rather than 5 full days. And that was mainly around childcare, that particular scenario. But yes, there's been a variety and I think I'm quite fortunate to have experienced that.
So I've worked across a range of different sectors, from academia to engineering and education, central government, and then NHS. And there's been variety. My experience of flexible working up to this point has been to fit in with finance team or various skills sets of teams, fitting in with a wider workforce. So if you've got some workforce which works shifts, and you've got other workforce which offer support services which don't work shifts, flexible work has often been introduced to try and find a way to get everyone to be in the same place at the same time. So when I was a head of finance in a large trust, the time that clinicians were available was often for meetings between their shifts when they were in. So I was supporting, I think, 6 to 8 specialised services. There were cohorts of consultants who wanted to have their meetings between 7 and 8 in the morning and 6 to 7 at night. So flexible working was introduced to try and give the structure so that everyone was available to support those meetings. That was more of a challenge in that situation because there was such a way it was set up, and the whole system wasn't set up to support across wider than the divisions. It meant that the flexible working meant individuals worked just many more hours. They had to be flexible to fit in, but to claim hours back, the opportunities within the time frame, because there was no cross working organised, the processes hadn't been set up. Flexible working did tend to cover for the idea that you had to be available at a wider much wider time hours than your core hours. So ended up working, 50 to 60-hour weeks, and to try to claim that time back wasn't really part of the culture and didn't really ever happen. But it was talked about as flexible working, and the possibility was notionally there. So my experience of flexible working was that it was introduced in a way which actually put a bit more pressure and lack of necessary benefits to individual members of staff within a very complex, challenging and important and very necessary to achieve. But to actually make it flexible, we needed a better organized setup before we went live with it.
And some of the technology would have helped move that on now, those scenarios, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. So in those days, Teams, it was 2009 to 2011. The technology for Teams working, for strong IT support wasn't really in place and wasn't really widely available. And actually, everybody, so the medical fraternity would have different IT set up to the support team fraternity. So there really would have had to been a lot of backroom engineering to get us ready for that flexible working. So flexible working, so that's been my experience before. So it's been very good to see it work positively in this situation, because I have seen it in other situations where it's been introduced as a concept but hasn't necessarily delivered on some of the express benefits.
And for me, it's definitely work-life balance. To have essentially a day off every 2 weeks really frees up the weekend. Also, things like if we have dental appointments, it's rather than having to take a few hours out of work, it's really useful to do them on the non-working day. So work-life balance for me.
I would say definitely work-life balance. I have caring responsibilities as well. So that it certainly helped. As Scott alluded to, in terms of a dentist appointment, for example, when I go into the office, it's a 2-hour commute each way. So I can't just take an hour off to go to the dentist and make that up. For me, you'd lose half a day minimum. So to be able to work from home and pop out to the dentist is far easier, or even book it on a non-working day. It just makes these things far more pragmatic to deal with. So that's the main ones for me. And of course, there's the flexibility of on the days you work from home. Not speaking particularly of myself, but for others, who might have particularly parenting responsibilities or even a commute, you don't have to rush out the door at 5 to 5 or whatever it is because you're going to miss your train or you need to go and get your kids from school. If you're working from home on those days, you can pick up your kids and come back and carry on working if you're working towards a deadline, or put something in the oven while you carry on. So it's made it far more flexible in everything you do, both personally and work-wise.
So for me, I would echo that. From the personal impact, I would echo exactly the same as Scott and Tanya. Very much felt the same as me. From managing the deliveries and the outputs, I think one of the challenges we've had across the NHS system has been, because we've had so much change over the years, is to be set out within job descriptions and requirements of people's outputs on a day-to-day basis. We've had to be very, very flexible. And sometimes that has left, especially new starters or people coming in, new starters to the NHS particularly, but people coming from a different organisation, it's quite hard to know exactly the full range of their work. And it can change quite rapidly and quite significantly. One of the things you have to do with flexible working is you have to be much more over the top of exactly what the demands are, what everyone's role is, what everyone's outputs are, what are the outcomes that are wanted, and to be able to articulate that quite clearly so that everyone has the opportunity to succeed and deliver. Flexible working made that more important, more of an imperative to get that understanding in place. So some teams that was well established. Other teams were not quite so. And flexible working actually drove some of the implementation of best practice, which has been long overdue, knowing exactly what each other were doing, outputs, and how to support. I also saw it as another good opportunity to cross-train, to you know, so that everyone knew what everyone else, not to check up on each other, but so we could cross-cover, we could develop individuals. It didn't work perfectly, but we were on that direction where we could upskill, uptrain, and give people wider working experience. So you can use it to develop skills, develop technical knowledge as well. So those, on top of the personal experiences, I think really were very helpful for the organisation. And we still need to leverage it further when we get back into sort of normal working times after COVID.
The main one, I would say, I've seen a massive cultural shift to being more supportive to working environments and people's, you know, caring responsibilities, or even just around from an employee's perspective, just being more flexible and being able to help. So, for example, as I touched on earlier, if you, you know, there was a particular workload that was or deadline coming up, and you needed to get a train, or you got your childcare issues or whatever. Previously, you wouldn't have even been able to help. Whereas now you're like, well, you know what, you know, as long as you don't mind me sort of logging off for an hour while I sort out XYZ, I'll be back on and I can help sort out, or, you know, work on that deadline then. So it makes people more, I found it's such a positive experience, and it just makes people more adaptable and more committed to both their team and the organization, because it's very much a give and take. And I think the key thing about it is, even though it's a flexible working, we do have it set up as a particularly scheduled flexible working. We have to be flexible within that too. And communication absolutely is key too.
No, just to say, I definitely agree with that. The teams I've worked in during the COVID period, when I've been redeployed, there's definitely a sense that people put more back in and are more willing to be flexible and work at different hours or longer than they would if they were in the office. So completely agree with you that.
Yes, longer, and also at the time when it's needed, because you've been working within that culture. When it's needed, it feels as though you're delivering on something which has been planned for. It doesn't feel so much of an imposition. It feels as though it's part of the role. And also, I think it also, for me, it gave a voice in our team. We have a team of 6, a small team, but not everyone had the same level of voice in meetings, because we had to talk about each individual's needs. It actually gives a greater voice to people who may be a bit more reticent in other times, because you are trying to coordinate your time. You have to give people space to hear everyone's point of view. To make this work, it needs to work across the piece. Still not perfect, but I think it gives a chance to get more voices heard when it comes to organisation. And I think that's been really important, can be even more important going forward.
Yeah, certainly in our specialised commissioning team, it really has to be underpinned with values. And I know, Brett, you've always speak about transparency, and we have been very transparent, and it's important to give other people a voice. But I think you really need those values in a team to make flexible working work.
Yeah.
There is a pitfall on an individual level that on a non-working day, for example, you think, well, I'm just going to log on and see if I got a response to that email that I sent yesterday, or whatever the case is. And suddenly you've lost 2 hours of your non-working day. So there is something about being self-disciplined too. And the other thing I found quite useful, Brett alluded to people on their signature saying, these are my working days. What I am seeing more and more as we're going along is people will literally put on there, they'll put a comment along the lines of, I do send emails outside working hours, but I don't expect a response. Because other people may not do flexible working, and they feel like if you're sending them emails at 7 o'clock at night, you're almost expecting a response quite soon after that. And that's not the case. And it's kind of just outlaying that. So I think that's, again, it's about transparency and communication and just having those values.